Okay, so tonight's fly is called the Rodney, and it's a very simple fly. It's a very good, I'll put it in the vise so you can see the finished product. Very simple fly to tie. It's a very, like a lot of simple flies, it's a very effective fly. I sort of only try to bring flies along to tie that I think are really foolproof and do work, and this is a very effective fly. So the fly that we're tying tonight uses, maybe if I start off at the top, we use a 3mm bead, and these are a brass bead. They're an orange fluoro brass bead, and that's a really important trigger of this fly. The rest is pretty straightforward. Possum dubbing, nice. I think this is called Awesome Possum, and it is really good dubbing to use. Nice and fine. Any fairly fine dubbing is good because it's easy to use and it gives you a nice slim body. We're also using a rib, and this is a 2.2mm rib that should work quite well. I think that sort of shows it there. Any sort of tail, cock hackle or hen hackle, works really well for the tail. So maybe if I just go through and tie one up for you, and then we'll go through step by step. So that's the finished product that you can see up there. The lighting makes it look a little bit more orange than yellow, but in fact it is quite orange. So to start with, these beads that we've got they're not slotted beads. You'll see there's a wide opening and there's a narrow opening. So you start off by putting the point of the hook through the narrow opening, and the wide opening just allows the bead to go around the bend of the hook. So usually if I'm buying beads and hooks, I'll actually take them out in the shop just to make sure that they do fit the hook. Some beads won't get around the bend, and some beads will be too big and they'll actually go over the eye of the hook. So you want them to be the right size. Putting the hook in the vise, I make sure that's nice secure and that the shank is nice and horizontal. Push the fly up a bit. I get my thread started. So just keeping a nice short thread, just a few wraps back over the thread so that'll hang and tie in. And I'll cut this off there, and I'll just build it up a little bit behind the eye, behind the bead. Build the thread up. Don't need to be too fussy. I'm not going to build it up so that it will be secure. That will happen a bit later on. Then I'll work my way, just with touch turns, not that important, back to the bend. And this is sort of a little bit of a danger point, particularly for beginners. You now have to angle your thread so that you don't nick your thread on the point of the hook. By the way, I should have mentioned the hooks that we're using. And these hooks are haddock Stillwater wets, or Stillwater and wet, and these are a barbless hook. And the black nickel is sort of recommended for this fly. The pattern that I'm using is one that's Craig Coltman. I've sort of used, using his technique of tying the fly and the materials that he suggests. So once you're back to beyond the bend, I was going to say to about where the barb would be, if there was a barb on the hook, and then we're ready to tie in a tail. So I reckon any old black material for this, black hackle will do, and I just preen the feathers back a bit so they stand out
Could you lift your hands so I can see it?
At right angle.
Yeah, just
there we are. That's a bit better, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, and then I'd go down and just pinch out a clump so that I've got, let's see, probably about 1 centimetre's worth I don't know if you can see that very well. Swap them over, line them up, and really these need to be about, I reckon, half, maybe 2/3 of the shank. And a nymph's tail isn't very long. It's not as long as the adult's tail. So, and this is roughly a mayfly's imitation, pretty rough. They don't normally sort of have redheads like this. So then start off, put your hackle on the top, have it lined up, nice pinch of the thread, pinching the thread as you pull it down just so it pulls it into place, and you can wind that all the way up to the bead, and that just helps to add some bulk. And then come back down to the bottom again, making sure that the tail doesn't slip around. So I usually just pull it up a little bit, so that gives me a nice tail. All right, once you've got that done, then it's on to using a little bit of ribbing, and I have got some silver thread right here. Brand new, in fact, so it might take you a little bit to get it off the spool. There it is. Beautiful. So as I said, this is they're putting measurements on them now, but I'd call this medium. It's not a really fine one, and probably gives a little bit of weight, and it just makes it a little bit more robust. So you can trim off a few centimetres. Don't leave this too short. Don't be sort of too stingy with it, because it becomes too difficult to handle. So you need, I don't know, 7 centimetres perhaps. And once again, just I hold that on so it comes up to pretty much the bead. And you can just wrap that on, try not to twist it around, wrap it back to the bend again, right back to where the tail begins, and that looks pretty good there. All right, so now we're on to putting the dubbing on. As I said, and it doesn't have to be possum dubbing, but I find this is just a really nice fine dubbing. Less is more with dubbing. So with your noodle, always make sure you're twisting in the one direction. Good name for a band. And when you've got a bit of a noodle made up, you can slide that up and just touching wraps. And, I'll often just, twist it on and dub as I'm going. So always better to put too little on, because you can add more, but it's kind of tricky stuff to take off. Another reason you don't want this too bulky is you want it to get down fairly quickly, even though this is pretty much a lake fly. I've used it in rivers as well, particularly slow moving rivers, but fished on a lake underneath an indicator or a dry, it's really effective. And I know a lot of people have had a lot of success with this at Millbrook. It's a bit of a favourite fly there. I know Marshall and Barney and probably a few others that agree with that. I fished this in rivers in central Victoria, and particularly ones that flow into lakes, and at certain times of the year when the rainbows are starting to get into spawning mode and starting to move up those lakes, this has been absolutely deadly for me. And I've caught some nice fish up to about 6 pound on these, so they're a really effective fly, particularly on rainbows. I've also used them on the lake stand in Tassie as part of a team of, say, 2 or 3 flies when I'm lock style fishing, and as a point fly, which is the end fly that weighs the other flies down, it's really effective and a really good attractor pattern. So once you've got that dubbed right up to the bead, and that bead is now nice and secure, then you're ready to do your wraps. Put your rib in, and basically with the rib you go the opposite direction to what you were going with your wraps of the dubbing. So, I don't know, 4 wraps. I'm actually going to go over this again at the top, but I bring it up to the top. Sort of swapped hands a bit there. Tied in, a few at the front, a few at the back, and then you can just kind of helicopter this off or cut it off. Perhaps I'll cut it off. And then just to build up the thorax a little bit, I'll put in a bit more dubbing just to build that up. And I'll make this a little bit rougher as well, just to make it look a bit buggier. Could do with a little bit more. There have been all sorts of little experiments done with these beads, and one of the tests they've done is just to use the beads with thread bodies, just to see if it's the bead that works, and I think it probably is the bead that is the big factor in this fly, so that's the attractor. So really the rest of it probably doesn't matter that much, but it's still good to get, the right proportions with a fly. So I like to use a whip finish tool, particularly when I'm doing these patterns, because it means I can wrap in behind the bead really nice and smooth. I can get my wraps in nice and smooth. So half a dozen wraps in there. Some people put glue on the thread, and that's not a bad idea. I find this works pretty well, just putting a little drop of head cement. That'll hold that all in really nicely, and that's pretty much it. That's the Rodney.